we can start exactly there. You are still operating on politics. You're still working on the same area.
Yeah.
And I know that you have a certain propensity to be jaded, but do you really see nothing new? I mean, what is your general diagnosis at this point? And particularly the focus is obviously transatlantic issues, Europe and the US.
Well, the great irony is, especially when it comes to transatlantic and this question of security and so-called European sovereignty, is that this is what EU leaders and NATO Europe has been saying for a long time they've wanted. So there's a bit of a paradox that how I don't see any other alternative besides having a mean and distant and transactional United States president to get European allies to do the thing they said they've always wanted to do, which is have more power, have more hard power, have more security responsibility, have more burden sharing. It's what the US has said it's wanted of its European allies for many, many years, long before Donald Trump. It's what European officials have said they've wanted for themselves. And it's never going to happen if you have a president who's nice, right? If you always know that your big brother America is going to be there to protect you, you're never going to do anything because people don't change when they want to. They change when they have to.
No, I think that
So this is kind of the irony here. Like I just don't see any other alternative. In that regard, I don't want to give too much credit to Donald Trump because I don't think he's playing any kind of 4D chess game. But he does understand how to put people under pressure and how to create this environment of chaos and catastrophe that forces people to react and forces people into a negotiating position.
Right. I mean, I think it's fair to say, at least, the second part of the claim to me is a little bit more, a bit more exotic. But I most certainly do realize that, and I think that anybody that has been looking at European politics for as long as we have, probably knows very well that there is sort of generic, ongoing, sort of rewashed and reworn expression of good intentions concerning sovereignty, concerning security vulnerabilities, concerning all the usual goodies, and then there is an absolute incapacity or unwillingness to actually do anything about it, precisely because in a way you have the adolescent problem of, well, you would like freedom, but mom's cooking is so wonderful that it makes it very hard to
move out.
Exactly, to move out, literally. And I think that is most certainly part of the equation here. It is a bit disturbing to sort of look around the block and see all of those people that when Joe Biden won the election went out shouting and celebrating, got drunk on America is back. America was not back. America was never going to be back. And I think that anybody that knew anything about America knew that pretty much, the Biden administration were probably the death throes of a certain type of Atlanticism that Europe had.
And honestly, good riddance. I mean, this was a Cold War playbook. I'd like to move beyond Cold War frameworks, right? I mean, I'm not saying that Donald Trump is the answer. Donald Trump is identifying a lot of problems in the system. Unfortunately, his answer to those problems is just destroy it all. I think it's a more constructive response to be like, okay, here are the problems. What can our alternatives be? What can we replace these things with? But the status quo of sort of Cold War politics and framing the current security issues in a Cold War manner is both inaccurate and very dangerous. And in some ways, it's even worse than the Cold War, because in the Cold War, the two poles talked to each other. There was cultural, political, diplomatic, artistic exchange between the United States and the Soviet Union. There was great competition, of course. There was military tensions, of course. There was readiness to fight each other, but there was still an openness and a dialogue. And nowadays, to say like, hey, maybe we should talk to the other side, that makes you some kind of pro-Putin propagandist. Just to say we should talk, just to go back to what conservatives in the Cold War era, who would actually be liberals, because those are kind of the same thing, to go back to what they to their standard policies.
I suppose in defense of shutting the Russians down, I would say that a lot of the carrots that were offered during the Cold War were offered precisely because there was a stick, right? There was always a stick on the table, and part of the thing that we have seen, and this is to me one of the most interesting parts of the first month. The first century of Trump, I was going to say, but no, it's been only a month.
I mean, he can live. These people live a very long time, so a century.
They do. I just don't know if we will actually live long enough to see.
Which might also be okay.
Good haven, but I think that what we see, or at least what I'm seeing, is not only the complete dismantling of, say, for better words, of the unipolar as is now. I mean, I know that this month the words of the month are unipolar and transactional, so I'm trying to include them in every sentence I say.
Well, you're very inclusive, Martin. So
inclusive is gone. Sorry, man. That's very 2024.
I'm very old-fashioned.
But I think that we're not only seeing the dismantling of sort of the geostrategic architecture and the security architecture of the last 80 years, but to me, what is considerably more worrying, and I am somebody who grew up in Argentina in the 70s, so I have no love for American foreign policy. I mean, everything that the KGB did on the East, the CIA and its friends did in the West. I mean,
well, that's an excellent point. I mean, I think this whole debate is, obviously, so Eurocentric.
There is a point I want to make, which is that being said, I mean, my lack of love for American foreign policy still manage to recognize above that there is sort of a structure of balance that is built precisely on the security construction of the US. And I think that the big fear right now is that what we're seeing is the complete disassembly of the American position. This is not really just a shift. What I actually would argue is that what Trump is doing is actually quite literally disassembling American power brick by brick in a way that I don't think that there is coming back from that.
Well, not brick by brick. I would say building by building or block by block. Yeah, I mean, I think two things can be true at once. I mean, this is the problem. We're in an era of broken clock syndrome where very, very stupid or bad people can have a couple good ideas every day, but that doesn't make their overall position detestable. And the other thing is, to your point, yes, the United States has done really awful things, and that's something that I think European leaders need to grapple with, that their security, the Cold War, the peace, the post-war peace and prosperity that Europe enjoyed under the nuclear umbrella of the United States came at the cost of the well-being and livelihoods of millions, if not billions, of people around the world. And now that anger, that ire, that viciousness of the United States is turning on itself and turning on its allies. And so, but at the same time, so that's true. But also what's true is just doing away with that, just saying, well, fuck the United States and its imperial tendencies and all the destruction that it's wrought all around the world. Let's destroy it all. That also is going to lead to a lot of destruction. So to your point, both these things can be true. And as I just said, there needs to be something you need to have something to replace it. It's not good enough to say that this is bad and let's get rid of it. There needs to be an alternative.
For me, what I see with I think sovereign clarity is not just that what we have is, again, this assembly of the geostrategic positioning of the US. This seems to me to be absolutely clear. I mean, not only in Ukraine, which as far as I'm concerned is an absolute catastrophe, because it's actually the ceding of space to some very dark forces. I mean, not only geostrategically, but you can imagine that I mean, I know the Ukrainian case fairly well, and I'm very much aware of corruption and, different. But make no mistake, Kiev under Zelensky was not Moscow under Putin. So the idea that, we could say, well, all things being equal, it would be just the same to have here a sort of, Urbanistan in Berlin or an Urbanistan in DC or an Urbanistan sort of capital in Brussels. It's just not the case.
Right.
I think what you also see is that in the destruction of things like USAID, you have the ceding of vast territories which have direct impact on the Western sort of political system. Like, I mean, Africa has ended up with 12 effective operators in USAID over what are thousands and thousands and thousands of square kilometers of operations, with the complete destruction of all the informal power that comes with that, right? So, you had a lot of American agency money, which was running health, which was running education, which was running a lot of what ultimately would be soft diplomacy. And that kind of informal power now being gone overnight by, by the good graces of Captain Musk. It's now basically territory that has been directly ceded to China and to Russia, not to mention groupuscules that actually emerged from uh, Islamic operations. I mean, from the Gulf or from farther up the road. So this is also the case for Colombia in Latin America. This is also the case for Bolivia. You have some really dangerous precedents in terms of the sort of retirement of forces. I mean, really just pulling the pieces out of the board and letting whoever else is there take over.
And this has been a long time trend. This is what I mean about how it's worse in the Cold War. Because in the Cold War, you had soft power projection. A lot of it was contemptible, and it was we all know how the CIA ran amok and destroyed so many lives in so many countries. Not only to say that the United States didn't just have to bomb a country to ruin it, but nonetheless, these other levers of power were there in the Cold War, and we've seen, and this predates Trump. Trump is part of this continuum of just the stick, right? Or in this case, getting rid of USAID, right? Maybe even getting rid of the stick as well. Who knows? It's very hard to know what actually comes after.
Most certainly. I mean, look, Ukraine is not just Ukraine, right? I think we can agree that Ukraine is actually Europe, it's Moldova, it's Albania, it's the Eastern Western Balkans, it's the Caucasus, as a matter of fact, I mean, Ukraine is even Taiwan, because the moment you actually ceded Taiwan, I mean, look.
Nous sommes Taiwan, nous sommes Ukraine, yes.
Well, I mean, the point is, I mean, of course, should be taken with some comedic gusto, but it should also be taken seriously in the sense that the precedent for how American power is projected and what happens to those countries that actually operated under the umbrella of American power is also something that is to be, it essentially can be deduced from the way that the Americans have now behaved in Ukraine. And I mean, it also goes to say that, and I'm sure you've been privy to these conversations, that, if you now, whether or not Musk shut down Starlink from the Ukrainian front and essentially shut down their operation, which in the end seems that it didn't happen, it has focused everybody's attention on the kind of liabilities that American hardware and software in defense architectures mean, right? You cannot rely on the US to protect your border. If you're Moldova, you cannot do it if you're the Baltic. You cannot even do it if you're NATO. I mean, I don't know if NATO still exists. Last I checked, Rutte still has a job, which is incredible that Mark Rutte still is employed. But as for what is that he's employed in, I'm still not very sure.
Well, if you take his remarks at the end of December in Brussels, here in Brussels, his first major address as Secretary General of NATO, if you take those remarks quite seriously, his job is to essentially chip away at the very way of life that he says we need to spend a lot of money on to defend, because he has made very clear that he's totally fine taking social spending and public spending away and putting it into defense. He very callously, I have to say. I mean, when my floor hit the jaw. My jaw hit the floor when I was sitting in this big auditorium, this beautiful room with chandeliers where he spoke from in December. I was also shocked that no one else around me seemed to understand how big the ramifications were of what he was saying. Where he just very callously said, "Well, we could just take a few percent of GDP away from social spending to put it towards defense." And, you don't have to be a pacifist or anti-war to understand that it's not about whether we should have strong militaries or not. But if you're going to invest in hard power at a time of rising nationalism and a time of increased dissatisfaction by your voters, and seeing widespread far right, some of it pro-Russian, politics taking force, what we're looking at is in 5 to 10 years, you basically have a Manchurian candidate situation where you have kitted out militaries, armed to the teeth. in NATO, and all the NATO countries are run by far right lunatics, some of which are pro-Russian. So
right.
no one seems to be looking down the road to see what this sort of interaction or lack thereof might actually be leading to. We already see it. Like Hungary is part of NATO, and Hungary, of course, in last week's special council summit, signed up to the idea of more defense spending for collective defense. Do we want Viktor Orban to have a armed to the teeth military? I don't know.
No,
And we can see that phenomenon playing out in many places.
I mean, I think it's really. I mean, it's really the kind of disaster of the policies of austerity, which then all of a sudden find themselves. I mean, this is a typical Republican problem in the U.S., right? I mean, you take away from sort of social spending and you put it into defense, and then things like the Pentagon become this sort of absolute black holes, financial black holes. The U.S. is not the kind of place, or at least not until now, it's not so exposed to the what I'm calling now the weaponization of the electorate, which Europe really is. I mean, the electorate has been weaponized against you, and much of that has happened with what I think are indeed Manchurian candidates, with what indeed is a very well planned digital campaign. And a lot of it, I think that you're completely right. I mean, maybe I'm really just repeating your point here, but I like to hear things in the sound of my own voice. So
that's clear, Martin.
It is very much the case that the policies of austerity that has actually pulled away and chipped away from the sort of the old and very established European, state of well-being, right? I mean, people now feel that this prosperity is essentially gone, has actually completely fueled the dissatisfaction in the east of Germany, in the north of France, in the northwest of France, in the south of Spain, and so on and so forth. I mean, it's very much the case that austerity and this kind of thing contributed to the satisfaction that brought the right and brought populist pro-Russians into the fold. I think that what is worth also pointing out is that as you are going to, if you're going to go into a confrontation, if you're going to have a war, if you're going to have people deployed at the Polish border, at the Baltic border with Russia, if you're going to have like Russian fireworks killing here and there a couple of like European soldiers, if you have a division, or you have a couple of people from Sachsen, or you have a couple of people from Mecklenburg-Vorpommern that get killed, I can see how you would have immediately the AfD and people in the street sort of trying essentially to bring the government down. Not to mention all of these discussions about enlistment and all of discussions about recruitment that are by and large false.
And mostly pipe dreams. Yeah. No, of course. I mean, in the few minutes we have left, we definitely can't touch on all of the problematic aspects of this question of defense and security when it comes to capabilities. Where is the money going to? What's the money being spent on? What are the actual threats? I do like this one comment from one of the folks listening right now, but the breakdown of international agreements, right? There's basically, especially in regards to arms control, right? It just doesn't exist anymore. So this again goes back to what I was saying about, I think we live in, forget that not only is the Cold War parallels dangerous, they're wrong, right? Because at least we had arms control. I feel like, I obviously I'm not old enough to duck and cover. But for as precarious as everyone felt back then, I feel like we're in a much more precarious situation now.
Yeah.
Because people with the fingers on the button are far less precarious, have far less impulse control. And there's neither the treaties nor the respect for treaties in international law that there maybe once was, at least in some semblance, to hold back our worst impulses.
Yeah, no, I mean, this was a comment by Peter Borkowitz, who is always very, very way too kind with my writing, and he really is a really great support. I think that one of the things that I think that his comment really is very good at pointing out is that we are back. He doesn't put it in the terms, but sorry, Peter, I'm going to put words into your comment, not in your mouth. Is that we are back into the politics of facts on the ground. It really doesn't matter anymore what the law, what regulation or what the statute is, you basically make the statute by putting the facts on the ground. And this is to a large degree what not only we have learned from the Israelis in Gaza, or the Israelis in the West Bank, or the Israelis in Lebanon, or the Israelis in Syria, but this is what we have learned from, the Russians in the east of Ukraine, the Russians in Crimea. I mean, and there is always, of course, a way to put makeup on it, right? But the fact is, what that means is that might makes right.
Yeah, that's where we're at. We're back to that. And I have nothing more to say about that.
No,
I mean,
but
also,
we should just drop it there. I mean, we can sing a song before we go.
So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, goodbye. How's that?
That seems fitting. And for a theme that has actually been part of our previous one of our previous episodes on Euroscopic, which was we will all go together when we go. From the great.
With that, I'm going to go to lunch.
It's been lovely here. That was short and sweet. And anytime you feel like dropping by in your very, very busy schedule.
Much too busy. I would love to have the time to do this for hours with you. We will endeavor to make that happen.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bill.
Thanks, Martin.
Talk to you soon.